Okay, hi everyone. I'm Megan Dabney here with COLA's Caregivers of Loved Ones with Aggression and Self-Injury with my lovely co-host Denise. And we're very happy today to have with us Nicole Dauz. She is a self-care coach, speaker, author. She's written a book, Self-Care from the Trenches with Love, Humor, and a Kick in the Pants. And she's also a parent of a child with special needs and a caregiver. So welcome, Denise Dawes.
Nicole, yes, very happy to be here. Thank you.
So I mentioned COLAs. Denise and I run a support group for caregivers of loved ones with aggressive and self-injurious behaviors. Um, it was started when I expressed in an advisory board meeting that we were a part of the difficulty in getting support for caregivers in my situation. And it sounds like you had a similar situation um, with nothing quite fitting the mold you needed. Can you explain about your story and how you discovered that self-care was such a necessary part of you being able to continue to function in your day-to-day life?
No, certainly. So thank you. So my daughter's Summer, just like the season, she is 14, and I have a son, Jordan, who is 16 and a half. And so she received her autism and her rare genetic disease diagnosis at 6 and a half. So, what you're referring to is those, first 6 years, we didn't really fit a box. And so
Mhm.
trying to access programs and supports was really challenging. And so we were fortunate that at 18 months, she saw the chief neurologist at the local children's hospital who kind of raised some alarm bells and said, oh, she's got major delays. And that's when our life really changed. We were like, oh. And so we found out she was, so global development delay means fine motor, gross motor, and speech. So we started weekly physical therapy so she could learn how to walk, which she did at 2 and a half. And then weekly occupational therapy so she could learn to hold utensils and then put socks on, etc. And so meanwhile, so let me go back. In Canada, we have a year maternity leave.
Oh, wow.
And so so
Nice.
when Summer turned 1, I went back to work. So I was working, well, I work full time in communications for the Canadian government, and, just resumed, life, working mom, 2 kids. I thought everything was great. I have a boy and a girl. And so I was just really operating in survival mode once we got that diagnosis. And I realized that my world and my future would not be how I envisioned it. And the reason being home for a year is so important is because I nurse Summer. And so, when you're sitting there in the chair nursing, there's nothing else to do aside, than be engaged, but to think. So for me, I dreamt, right? You
Mhm.
envision what that life will be like. It's so funny. You look back now, you're like, wow, we put so much pressure on ourselves and so many expectations unknowingly, right? I envisioned me coaching her volleyball, her getting married, and just all of these idyllic family vacations. And it was just so jarring from the reality of, at the time, 18 months, wasn't moving. So she would just sit on the floor and scream, knowing now that it was just probably her frustration, her only way to communicate. But because my first child, my son, was just so easy, he hit milestones. I thought, oh, wow, this parenting thing is really simple, right? I didn't have to follow charts or think about training. He just developed naturally. And so for myself, it was just brought up so many things I wasn't expecting. And it made me realize I needed to do even more. So I need to become a researcher. And then I had to organize all of these schedules. Oh, and I had to still show up at work and be productive and then run the household. And oh my goodness, we're not even talking about the paperwork. I'm not sure about on your end where you guys are, but the amount of paperwork required when you have a child with disabilities and all of the different organizations who don't talk to each other. So you're filling out the same forms over and over again. So now you're getting an idea of what the survival mode looked like. And so I did that for about 5 years. And it was funny. I was reading something and someone said survival mode means not dying. Basically, that's what survival mode means. You're basically working every day just to get through the day. And they said it's not living. And I was like looking back, I'm like, and that's true.
Yeah.
You don't have the capacity when you're in the moment, right? When you're out in that water and you're treading water, you're not thinking about, oh, I'm really hungry for an ice cream. I wonder what I make for dinner. You are solely focused on, I need to tread water. I need to keep going so that I don't sink.
Mm.
And I had tricked myself into thinking I was doing a really good job. Because when people asked how I was doing, I would say, oh, I'm good. But you know what that meant? People believed me. So no one offered help. And I didn't reach out for help. And so then I felt isolated and alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then my body was like, oh, you're not listening. It was trying to send me signals. But again, when you're in survival mode and you're heightened, you're really ignoring everything so you can just get that one job done.
Mm-hmm.
So one day I was at work, which I call my safe space. For
Mhm.
work, I was Nicole. I could go to the bathroom by myself and not be interrupted. I could eat my lunch in peace. And I know how, that's a big deal for us. And then I had a full-on panic attack where it hurt to breathe. And I couldn't take deep breaths. It was short, shallow breaths. And I actually had to bang on my desk to get someone's attention. And they knew right away something wasn't up. And then within 15 minutes, someone had to call an ambulance and I was taken out on a stretcher, what they're called, through the lobby on a busy day at lunch. And, again, I was so embarrassed, not, not the fact that I had pain chest. And I waited for an hour and a half in emergency. And by the time a doctor saw me, the pain had gone away. My breathing had resumed. And he looked at me and he checked me over. My vitals were fine. And he was like, oh, you're fine. You're good. Released me. And I was like, uh-oh, no, 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 no. Like my body just let me know that I'm not good. And that's when I realized like there's no doctors who specialize in supporting us. Like no one studies the immense stress that we parents of children with autism and disabilities go through. And that's when I realized that I need to just start kind of doing stuff for myself and kind of take this on. And I'm like, what? Like I need to take care of myself. No one's going to take care of me, like not even the doctor. And so that was another rude awakening. And slowly I decided that I would start going to the gym. Because I had always been active. So I do have that, I had that advantage. So I'm like, okay, I need to go back to the gym. And I asked my, at the time, husband if he could support me. Because I had so much mom guilt already because I worked, I would go to the gym after the kids went to bed. So, 8:30, cold, dark Canadian winter. And it is so funny because Mike's like, well, if you want to go to the gym, just go to the gym. I'm like, no, but you don't understand. I know I need to go to the gym, but I don't necessarily want to go to the gym. So can you just encourage me and remind me that I want to go? So I started going. And first, as I said, 3 times a week. And I went and it felt good. And then surprisingly, I slept better. And then I'm like, oh, this is a good circle. This is a circle I want to continue on and continue to grow. And that was the beginning of me starting to put myself first.
Awesome.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for sharing that. There was a lot of, for me, aha Wow. Yeah. Um, Mental health is becoming a bigger topic of discussion as we're recognizing the link between physical and mental health. What are some of the negative effects of not practicing self-care?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question because I don't like fear mongering.
Mhm,
However, I'll say
mhm,
to people, everything is a choice. So we can choose happiness or unhappiness. And people will say, well, I would never choose to be unhappy. And I said, that's true. We don't think of it that way. But by choosing not to do self care and to not take care of ourselves, we are by default choosing the other path. And when I present it in that manner, it feels softer
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
because I feel very grateful that I got that loud warning sign
Mhm.
because not everybody gets that. For some people, it's much more serious.
Right.
And so I think that's another reason I feel very passionate. And I have always been interested in wellness. And the more I read, I believe wholeheartedly that how we treat ourselves, what we put in our body, impacts whether or not we will have disease later in life. Because disease
Mhm.
is our body telling us it's in dis-ease, right? So for me, practicing self-care will just give everybody a better chance at not getting sick or maybe pushing it off longer. Because, for something, I'm not saying that it will prevent things, but what I'm saying is it will allow you to really give yourself a good chance at living, actually just living. And I think that's what people forget.
Yeah.
I think I should really explain my philosophy around self-care is that it's anything that brings you joy, right? It's that simple. And I believe self-care is how we show ourselves that we love ourselves. So it goes even deeper than that. So when I talk about self-care, I am saying, don't tell me you don't like the word self-care. Tell me why you don't think you're worthy of self-care.
Mhm.
That's what we're really diving into. So
Right.
imagine the impact that would have if you start to do things to show yourself that you're worthy, that you start to do things that go, wow, I do love myself. That's powerful.
Mhm.
And then the ripple effect that that has around the people around you. So the people for whom you're caring. So that is such a that is something I still deal with, not deal, sorry, am working through
Mhm.
because when I look back at the first 5 years of my daughter's behavior and um all of those times when she would just scream and I know she was just angry or frustrated and I think was she just reflecting back to me how I was actually feeling but ignoring? And
Mhm.
this isn't a blame game, and then I'm not trying to let other parents know, like, oh my goodness, am I doing this? But I just mean it's as you come further along, and it's just that awareness because I can see now that even though she's older, there's still lots of challenges and her behavior hasn't necessarily improved, but how I react to it has improved so much that it doesn't last as long. So it's just now that I'm here, I'm able to have a lot more self-compassion when I look back. But those are the questions like, just to be transparent, those are the questions I ask myself, going, oh, wow, I think all of that she was trying to tell me or show me what I was actually feeling, but was in complete denial of any emotion.
Wow.
Did that answer your question? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, So this kind of goes into that. Why for some people does practicing self-care, like you mentioned the mom guilt, why does practicing self-care bring about such feelings of guilt? If this is the thought process you have, how would you suggest starting to practice some self-care? And can you explain how self-care helps the entire family?
Yeah, this is such an important question because I think as women, we are conditioned to always put others first, right? Even as little girls, it's like, well, you share everything, even if
Hmm.
you don't, there versus I think now a lot of parenting can be like, well, there can be one toy that's special in yours, but you can share your other toys, right? Or, the example of, being forced to even to hug all those family members when you don't feel comfortable. It's just like we are taught at such a young age how to act, how to think, right? What to do, etc. So I think it's the guilt goes back to not understanding that self-care is how we show ourselves that we love ourselves. And it's really breaking down self-care into the simple activities. So often in society, we associate self-care with going to the spa, getting a massage, going on a trip away for a girls' weekend. And those are all wonderful. I have done them all. But the important things are what we do daily. And I think by shining a light on these, it will remove the barriers that so many people think that there are towards self-care. I think that's one thing. It's saying you don't need to spend money on self-care. You don't need to hire someone to come to the house to do self-care. I think that helps remove some of the guilt. And then the other part of your question, that self-care is actually a gift you give your family.
Hmm.
And so I think that really answers that, because when you realize that the time that we spend with our family or children, I remind myself that it's quality over quantity, right? You get so stuck in that, I need to be with my child all the time. Well, no, actually, that's not natural and that's not healthy. I think even like for both, even though they'll cry and they're upset when you leave, most often or not, as soon as you close the door and leave, then they stop crying. That's what I would always hear. Oh, as soon as you pulled out the driveway, she was fine. I'm like, of course. But that's what we're left with, that image of the reached out arms and mom, mom, mom. And so if we say, well, no, if I go away and I have a chance, or not even go away, if I go in my room or if I go in the bathroom and lock the door and people think I'm just taking, going to the bathroom and I'm just, taking some time for myself, then when you go back to your child, then you can be more fully present and more engaged. That's the gift. And that's what I'm learning now with Summer. Well, actually both kids, but it's so much easier to see with my daughter than with my son, that when I'm more engaged and present, she's happier. When I'm calm, she's happy. And so that's what I'd love parents to understand. And it's the balance that it's not always easy to get that time in. I appreciate it. And it's not to put the pressure, but it's really to look at self-care as self-advocacy, right? Like we are so good at advocating for the needs of our kids. And I'm just saying it's okay to put up your hand and advocate for yourself.
I like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Many of our families are so exhausted from the daily issues involved with dealing with somebody with aggressive and self-injurious behaviors. They struggle to find time for themselves, and self-care can seem like something that isn't possible to do. Most typical things one thinks of when people think about self-care are things that can't be done when you have so much to focus on your time on your loved one. A lot of us cannot even find providers to provide respite or support. In your book, you talk about how anything can be self-care and even list ideas. Can you give an example of some ways our families can practice self-care and take time for themselves when they have a limited time to do so?
Mm-hmm. So I have a go-to. I have my list of 3, but when you were asking that question, animals came to my mind right away. So if your families have pets, I speak that. So we have a cat, and there's something magical about hearing a cat purr, right? A cat will not jump on your lap when you're angry, right? Like, talk about sensing energy. And sometimes I think if you can find, and sometimes like my daughter will be with me. Before, she used to kick the cat. She used to hurt the cat. Well, not hurt it. She would try to hurt the cat. So we've worked really, really hard at being nice to the cat. And so sometimes it will just be petting the cat, and maybe I call maybe a therapy cat, because she's like a dog who's a cat, because she'll always be near us. Wherever we are in the house, she wants to be beside us. And so we'll pet maybe, and as soon as we start petting her, she purrs like a muffler. So it's really good. It's really rewarding, because we get instant, feedback from her. And then we'll just pet her, and then I'll just say, oh, Mavy's happy. And sometimes, like, even that is simple, but it's just the sound. It is calming. The research is showing that is just, lowers our blood pressure, our heart rate. And if we can just have small moments like that, and sometimes Summer's not around, and I'll just cuddle with Mavy and just feel that connection, and again, love. Now, my top 3 too, I say that these are wonderful because you can put them in your back pocket, because we're coming up to the holidays, right? So if you're traveling, you can pack these with you. The first is breathing. And I know a lot of people roll their eyes, but it is so beneficial when it is mindful breathing. And my favorite is the box breathing. So the reason it's called box breathing is you pick a number, say 4 seconds, and you do 4 seconds, you breathe in, 4 seconds you hold, 4 seconds you breathe out, and 4 seconds you hold. So that's why you get the box. And just doing that exercise will tell your body that it's safe. Because when you start breathing deeply, right? So when we're stressed or when we're in fight or flight, we kind of just operate from here. We just breathe from our chest. But the moment we kind of go deeper and take deep breaths, it's a signal to our body. So then it lowers our heart rate, it lowers our blood pressure, and allows us to relax. So depending on how much time you have or what has happened in your day, you could do that for 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, right? Someone really makes you mad, you might need 10 minutes, but it's there, and it's adaptable, and it's accessible. My second tip is hugging. Because we are caregivers, that means we have someone to hug. I appreciate that not all autistic kids like touch. I'm grateful Summer is very tactile. I'm so grateful. So when she's upset, I will grab her. I will take her in my arms, and sometimes she will resist. But after about 30 seconds, I can feel her body relax, and I will just hold her for a few minutes, and we do that. And that is like, it not only de-escalates, but it's like, for me, it's a reset button. And I will add the breathing. So I will start to breathe, and I'll do it more loudly. And then we'll start doing that in sync. And that's a really nice way for both of us to calm down and have that moment. And then the third is a mantra. So this is anytime you find yourself getting upset, and we have it's almost like a blink. When you blink, that's the time we have between getting a feeling and then reacting to it. And I have many examples where I've gone right to being angry and reacting, and it hasn't worked well. But this mantra is kind of just enough of a 1 or 2 second pause for me to choose a different path, a different reaction. And that mantra that I use is, it's not her fault. And so when she breaks something, I'll be, it's not her fault, it's not her fault, it's not her fault. Or a lot of the times I'll do it when we're actually hugging and breathing. After we're done breathing, I will just say, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Until I, kind of how I do, like, because at first it might be a little forced, but then you just kind of repeating it, and I repeat it to myself. I do believe that just that the energy of those words and the feeling behind it helps both of us. And, I always say to parents, you can borrow mine, you can come up with your own, but it's those 3 things that you can always have with you. And of course, these involve the other person. If, caregivers are like, I really would just like a few minutes, you can do the breathing by yourself. Another thing is dancing. I love music. I think when we're able to, and I dance in front of a mirror, only because I smile and I'm happy and I want to, right? It's that reminder, and it's just like moving our body. And sometimes it's just enough to release energy, right? We just want to change the energy in our body. And so we put on our favorite music, something that has a little bit of a beat to it. And that is 5 easy minutes to bring joy into your life.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
And that's what I think, that's what I mean, in the sense of I say, well, how do we overcomplicate it? And it's, I think when we approach it from that lens, and I think another thing that, when you touched on around the guilt, is that when we're in survival mode, we're not operating up here, right? We're not really thinking about what our wants are and needs. But when's the last time anyone's ever asked you what you want, or you had the time to sit down and go, what would I like? And so that's why having this conversation and doing these even small activities, now your brain just subconsciously is going to think of all those other things that maybe you enjoy doing that you've forgotten because caregiving has taken over. And so don't be surprised, over the next couple of weeks, you'll have these ideas of, where did that come from? And little by little, because there'll be things that bring you joy.
Right.
And then and then you can go from there.
Awesome. I like that you mentioned that you involve your daughter too, because that's important. I think with self-care, you think I have to be by myself, I have to have time alone, and you can involve your child, and then not only are you getting the rewards, but you're teaching them. So I think
Yes.
that's real great. My daughter used to love doing the Zumba DVDs.
Yeah.
So we would do that, and she liked it, and I was also getting like rid of some stress and anxiety and things when I was dancing it out. So I think that's a real good thing for people to remember.
Yeah.
Practicing self-care makes you feel better. It can reduce stress, anxiety, depression, give you some control in your life. So why is it that after seeing all these benefits that come with practicing self-care, is it so easy to stop doing it and fall back into bad habits?
Yeah. I think once we realize that our mind is not our best friend, that helps. For the longest time, I had assumed, or I didn't even know the difference. I just thought the chatter in my head was me. And, well, it's in my brain's in my body, so it would have my best interest at heart, sort of thing. And then I started realizing that, well, no, they're stories, because I'm noticing these stories. So where are the stories coming from? I'm like, does it even matter? But once I realized, oh, I have a choice in this. And I need to start policing my thoughts because my thoughts aren't helping me. And research has come out to say, was it like 80–90% of our thoughts are negative? I share this so people feel better. Like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with anybody. It's just for some reason, the majority of our thoughts are negative. So it's like we need to work extra hard to have positive thoughts and realize that comfort. So basically the thoughts are saying, but you've always done this. And sometimes change takes time. And after a while, and I know there's different research around different time frames, so I'll just say if you just consistently do it and remind yourself that it's worthwhile, but also keep in mind that there are ebbs and flows in life, and that when you wake up every day, you're going to feel different. Right. And I think that's important. So there are days, thankfully not often, that I feel like doing nothing. And I used to beat myself up about that. And now I'm just like, it's okay. So I won't say day, like it's a Friday night and I literally want to do nothing except watch romantic Hallmark movies on or stream them. And then now I'm like, that's okay. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And I would get worried if I did that every night for a month and then things, things didn't get done. But I think it's having a little more self-compassion about seeing what's going on in your life, but balancing that with the commitment to at least on a daily basis, honor yourself. And I think I would ask people, what do you associate, what feeling do you associate when you hear the word self-care? So if it's negative, then it sounds so silly, but is using a different word help? For some people it does, and that just makes me giggle, but I'm like,
right,
whatever works. Like this is about solutions.
Right.
So if you can shift that thought to, I'm going to show myself I love myself every day. Yeah. I think that allows people to do those, work harder to find the time. So sometimes it's just those shifts. And realizing that even though it looks really easy sometimes for people, it's not. It's still a choice that people make. And it's not about comparing, but it's just about being aware that the gremlins and the negative thoughts are natural. It's just building that muscle to kind of like, nice try. I choose me today.
Yeah. This is just an interjection, and then I'll ask you the next question. But we are not our thoughts. That is such a important thing to say, because I think we're conditioned to believe that we are our thoughts. Anything that comes into our mind, oh my goodness, you must be a bad person. You just thought that. But so we're not our thoughts. That's so, I think that's freeing in and of itself just to hear that. So thank you for saying that. Moving back a little bit to the survival mode. Yeah. You mentioned in your book that you remember being in survival mode, and you've mentioned it here. That's something that a lot of our families can relate to. For those that may not understand, can you explain what that looks like in terms of even different than what we perceive as our normal mode, but what is survival mode? And when you find yourself in that mode, it can be difficult to focus on anything else besides that. Are there signs our families should be aware of that they need to focus a little more on themselves? You've mentioned a few, but.
Yeah. So what that looks like. I believe that when we're in, for me personally, when I was in survival mode, and I can only see this now by looking back. It's just
Right.
association. When anything else came up other than the care for my daughter, I just pretended it didn't exist, which
Mhm.
isn't always healthy. And one example of that would just be my son's behavior. So imagine, Summer was a year and a half. So I had an energetic, high level 4-year-old boy who was just craving attention. So that was just manifesting in different ways. And so even though I was aware of that, I did not have the bandwidth
Yeah.
to do anything about it at the time. So I just told myself it was fine.
Mhm.
And so I think that's an example. So I was unable to process what his behavior was actually telling me.
Mhm.
I was unable to process maybe he needs support. I was so overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, my life. I'm just trying to get my daughter to learn how to walk. Like we were literally just doing little squats so she could build the muscles in her leg. And also, one thing we haven't really touched on really are emotions. And in my book, I called it my black box. Like anytime I had an emotion, I just put it in the black box. Like there is no time for emotions when we are in survival mode, right? The good and the bad. And that's the thing, you don't get to choose. Oh, I just want the good emotions and I'm just going to ignore the bad. No, if we're denying our emotions, we deny them all. And so so that's what survival mode looks like. And it's I think, how someone knows they're in survival mode, I think would be the, so for me, this is where the stories come in. I told myself that there were a lot of victim statements, right? I thought I was being punished for things I had done before I became a caregiver. I had, sugar. What was I going to say? I was jealous of anybody that looked like they had a good life. And I was resentful. Like all of those things, I believe, are little signs that you could be in survival mode.
Right.
Because you believe, this is what I'm actually trying to say. You believe you have no choice in the matter. So you believe you're stuck and that this has happened to you and your hands are tied. And so it was only when I realized that I did have a choice. So I believe for caregivers, I would say if you're trying to like there's two phases. Some don't even realize they're still at the pre-self-care phase. So it's either find supportive support or reach out to at least one person and ask for help, and try to do something. And it's a really interesting circle because you have self-care and you have self-love and you have self-worth. And I don't think it matters what order they go in. You don't, like I started practicing self-care before I realized I was worthy of it or that I love myself. I just started doing it. And then the rest came later. But other people, again, there's no right or wrong way. And I would just let people know or that it does make a difference and that it's really about reclaiming your power. And it's part of it is like, this is your life and this is the acceptance part.
Right.
And it's this is hard and I'm the and part. So I know when I first time I said, or I think it was a fellow caregiver said, caregiving's hard. I was really like, they admitted that? Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now I laugh. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so hard.
Oh,
And I'm still going to practice self-care. And I'm still going to celebrate the journey. And I'm still allowed to have a meaningful life.
right.
This is kind of part of the journey. Is at the beginning, it was like I was so worried that by saying it was hard, I would be disrespecting my daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we all stay in our bubble. And I call it the caregiver paradox. We feel isolated and alone, yet we're 61 million family caregivers in North America. Not in North America, sorry, the States and Canada. My apologies. I know in the States, like in Canada, it's 1 in 67. In the States, it's what, 1 in 44. Like this, like we know we're not alone, but so much of our caregiving goes on behind closed doors. So we feel isolated,
Right.
Mhm.
right? The other caregiver paradox is the range of like in one day, we can feel joy and then anger, resentment, and shame and guilt. And it's just this, it's almost too much. And then I think that that's where the importance of discussions like this come in, is that letting people know that, but it's actually normal for a parent caregiver to have these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say out loud that caregiving is hard. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean we don't love our children, right? Caregiving is the most important role that we'll ever have. However, it's still a role. And this is, I
Right.
think, the challenge for us moms, right? It's like we created this human being, right? They are, and I know, sorry, there's different ways to motherhood, but I think for the majority of parent caregivers, and that child is part of you, and yet the behavior of that child can bring so much rage and anger and resentment, and then we beat ourselves up instead of just saying it's natural to have those emotions based on what we're experiencing and living. It
Yeah.
doesn't make us a bad mom, it doesn't make them a bad child. It's just kind of accepting this is how it is, and then figuring out how can I make the most of this journey, and saying I am allowed to have a meaningful life so that I can allow my child to have the most meaningful life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, even if I am talking, I mean, and we have the support group, I feel like if I'm complaining about something, I still have to add, I love my child, but like it's implied, like everybody can complain, like it's
Yeah.
normal, but you still feel like you have to like defend yourself. Like I still love them, which is silly, but
Oh no, I mean I think it's natural. However, it's just the judgment of society
Yeah.
and the so I feel so we're having this very, vulnerable conversation, but it is different when it goes online and it's just people's posting and it's not face to face always, depending, and so it
mm,
is, and everyone's experience is a little different. And that's also
mm,
been very humbling for me, is I have to realize that everyone comes to the table with very different experiences,
Mhm.
and especially supporting fellow caregivers in that I think naturally we compare even though there's no comparison. So there
Mhm.
could be a child with has more severe needs than my daughter, and then so I think that, oh, it must be so much harder, or this or that. But then they'll look at Summer and they're like, oh my gosh, she must be so much harder, and they're like, oh my goodness, we're not helping ourselves, versus just my
Right.
child is unique, it's hard,
Right.
that's it.
Yeah. Then I wonder if that goes back to those thoughts. You know what I mean? It's those thoughts that are not really useful. You know, I think humans have a tendency to just biologically compare, contrast, sort,
Yeah.
and we just have to understand that it's kind of a useless thing. Sometimes in this case, it's useless, you know. Yeah.
Agreed.
So as we've said, caregiving can be very overwhelming and it's easy to lose your identity when you're in that role. Everything you do is for another person. Many women can forget that they are women with needs. Obviously men can too, but I feel like this is something that happens more with women.
Yeah.
You have a chapter in your book that covers a topic that's not often talked about, and that's the topic of pleasure. You talk about how making time for a sex life, even if you're alone, can have benefits. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Whew, I'm getting red now. I, um, yes. So, I spoke about earlier of that, we as women, like our bodies create life.
Mm.
And yet we're raised to feel shame around, I think, our bodies and exploring them, etc. And I think a really good example is when my son was, I have when he was still in diapers, and he found his penis. Like
Mm.
we celebrated, and like I tell, you know what I mean? And I like, but if no one would do that for a girl, no one would say, "Oh my gosh, my daughter found her vagina." And I know it's silly, but that just kind of goes to how society at a very young age. I was actually listening to a podcast where a mother felt so badly because when her daughter did do that when she was younger, she touched her hand and said bad. And you're like, wow, we celebrate one and we punish the other. And I surprisingly shared in my book that I was 46, and it took me 46 years to realize that I was allowed to touch my own body and to
Yeah.
not feel shame, even
Right.
though I had created life, carried 2 children, nursed them, fed them, nurtured them. And so I find it fascinating. And what it's done for me, it's really helped heal. And it's helped me on my self-love journey. Because I thought, how can we truly love ourselves if we're afraid of our own bodies?
Right.
And then I speak to the fact that, the clitoris, the only purpose is for pleasure. When I found that out, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Women, we have a body part that was created only for pleasure. And I'm finding out this at what age?
Right.
I'm like, mom never talked to me about it, right?
Right.
It's never discussed in health class. So again, it's just everything is shame. And I was raised, I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. I couldn't have any piercing. Showing skin was bad. That was my mother's own stuff. She was projecting on me. I was their only daughter. I had 2 older brothers. So that wasn't necessarily healthy, and I just believe that as women, it's very liberating and empowering to realize that we can pleasure ourselves. And so this is not anti-man. I mean, no, I love love, the idea of
Mm.
a romantic partner and all of that. Yes. But it's much deeper in the sense it's about knowing yourself. And it's actually about going back to that question, what do you enjoy?
Mm-hmm.
So it's allowing you to find out what brings you joy and pleasure before you invite someone in.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
you then are allowed. And then there's research around the healing impacts of orgasms.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that one of the reasons I probably had never had an orgasm up until that time was because I was so like just like this, and then
Mhm.
realizing your body actually needs to be fully relaxed. It needs to feel safe in order to enjoy or experience pleasure. So it was all of these things. It was me realizing that sometimes I would cry and I was like, oh, I actually have all of this pent up stress in my body that now that I feel safe, I'm just releasing. And so I think that's a positive way. Sorry, a really positive. Any way that we can release stress from our body,
Right.
we can do it. Pleasure one is not talked about enough. And it was interesting because so many people be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you added this just to your book. No one talks about this. And it really surprised me because then people shared their practice with me. But I was like, wow, it's just like this, I'm like this underground thing. Yet in movies, it's referenced all the time around men. And there was even, it's just accepted.
Right.
And so I think it's kind of that whole idea that, caregiving is hard and we're allowed to, not even allowed to admit that. It's kind of like, oh, it's taking back our power. And it is a way that we can, it can be part of your self-care routine because it's another way to show yourself that you love yourself and that you're worthy of that. And then it's on, can also be on your own schedule.
Right.
Right? And then once you know what you like, then you can share that with your partner. And to me, that's intimacy when you can actually have those discussions about what your wants and your needs are. But if you've never touched yourself, you wouldn't know.
Right.
Yeah. Two thoughts. It goes back to the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that are just so ingrained from what, from our lives, society, everything about our sexuality is only there as a part of another person. We don't have, we have our so we can only be sexual if there's another person involved. I mean, those are stories that, just are ingrained in a lot of women. And then I had another point. I can't remember. So there was another, but those stories, just changing the stories,
Yes.
like not rewriting our stories, but enriching them so they serve a better purpose, I
Yeah.
guess is what I was thinking, because
Mhm.
stories are important, but filling them in so it's a complete story, it takes
Yes.
effort and time.
Well, I know
Yeah.
people who don't feel comfortable being naked in front of another person.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that could prevent people from accessing pleasure. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing when, part of the self pleasure is just even getting comfortable in your own skin,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's an analogy or, all in itself. But, when you can, look at yourself and honor your body
Yeah.
and love your body, then I think it's that builds some self confidence and
Yes.
helps build that muscle, yeah, for inner confidence. And again, that's just a benefits everyone,
Yeah.
but we're not even talking about the health benefits of what's the word I'm looking for. I just had a friend, not just, sorry, I have a friend whose dad passed away when she was quite young, so her mom was a widow. And the health benefits of not having sex and then not self-pleasuring, then there's issues down there because it needs lubrication and it needs
Mhm.
activity and all of that stuff. So you could think of it as a way, an oil change for your body and just do
Mm-hmm.
self-pleasure.
It's definitely a component of self-care, however that looks for a person, and
Yes.
aligns with them. Yeah.
And no, that's such a good point. And it's not about preaching or telling people what to. It's all about removing the shame
Yeah.
associated with it and then allowing people to choose whether or not that's for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. Um, Obviously, we are very fortunate to have you here with us. I can't tell you how fortunate we are. Thank you so much. And can pick your brain about these issues. For those who don't have you right in front of them, how could they benefit from having a self-care coach? Are there free resources? You are Canadian based. Do people see you virtually? And how can people connect with you?
Mm-hmm. So the best way is NicoleDauz.com. Keep it simple. And I know
Mm-hmm.
will be added to the show notes, but also I have an online free Facebook group. So we're
Oh,
talking about free resources. So I have 8 guides on there. There's some audio, there's some worksheets, and there's some tips. And then I'm in the group about 4 or 5 times a week doing posts. And in the new year, we'll be doing live sessions on a weekly
wow.
basis. And I do see people virtually. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. So people, if they're interested, they can reach out. Sorry, I've got to fly. And I always say there's one version of me. So I say, self-select that. If you, enjoyed this discussion, then this is exactly the same Nicole who you'll see when you show up for a coaching call. And if I'm not your cup of tea, that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I have shared your Facebook group with our
Thank
Facebook
you.
group, so hopefully we can get like some more people.
Yeah.
Because this is so important for our families. Like we just need more resources. So definitely check out Nicole's book. Self-Care from the Trenches of Love, Humor, and a Kick of the Pants. I got it off Amazon, but you can also get it off of NicoleDauz.com. I'm going to put her link down in the description below. Nicole, thank you so much for meeting with us today and talking about these things with us. It's so needed in our community. So
Yeah.
we
My
really
absolute
appreciate having
pleasure.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do. That's amazing.
All right. Well, have a good day, everyone. Thanks for
So,
joining us.
do you want to turn off our recording? And
Yeah.
I'll ask another question.